In this video, I'm going to introduce you to loops in Python. Python supports two different types of loops, the while loop and the for loop, and we'll take a look at the while loop first. The while loop is a control flow statement that allows a program to repeatedly execute a block of code as long as a condition remains true. And some key features of while loops are that they evaluate a condition before each iteration. This means if that condition is false, the while loop will not execute. You can use the break keyword to terminate the loop prematurely. You can use the continue keyword to skip the current iteration and go to the next iteration. And you can use an optional else clause, which is code that will execute once the condition of the while loop is false. Over here on the right, we'll see some syntax examples. And we have while condition and then a colon, and then underneath it is indented code, and that code is to execute if the condition is true. Then we have another example that shows while condition with the colon, and then indented under that is the code to execute if condition is true, and an optional break statement to break out of the while loop. Under that, we have while condition with the colon, and then indented under that is code to execute if condition is true, and the optional continue keyword if we want to skip the current iteration and move on to the next one. Then we have a while condition with a colon with an optional else clause. So under the while condition, we have indented code that executes if the condition is true. And then we have the else clause, which is code that will execute once this condition becomes false. Now let's take a look at for loops. For loops are similar to while loops, but they are control flow statements that iterate over a sequence or iterable object and execute a block of code for each item in that sequence or iterable object. Key features of for loops are that they also support the break keyword to terminate the loop prematurely, and they support the continue keyword to skip the rest of the current iteration and move on to the next. They also use an else clause that is code to execute after the for loop finishes, but like the while loop, it does not execute if the break keyword is used. Over here on the right, we have some syntax examples. You'll see that it is for item in sequence, and the sequence could be an iterable object as well. And then indented underneath that, we have code to execute for each iteration. Then we have for item in sequence with the code to execute for each iteration and a break keyword if we want it to break out early. Then we have for item in sequence with the code to execute for each iteration and the continue keyword if we want to skip the current iteration. Then we have for item in sequence with the code to execute for each iteration indented underneath it, and then an optional else clause where it is code to be executed after the loop finishes. In the next videos, we will look at examples of the while and for loops.